Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee and the Select Board on Monday, February 5th, 2024. We'll start with open forum if anybody has anything.
Hi, my name is Arnie Price. I live on Oak Hill Road here in town. I promise this will be brief. Okay, so I'm concerned about the magnitude of the override. I tried to do a deep dive into some of the info, and according to the charts, the graphs that came out. So I found that Westford has the 11th highest tax bill per capita out of the towns in the market basket. And for per capita purposes, we are way behind most of the towns in the market basket. As a matter of fact, Littleton, Chelmsford, and Kingsborough, according to the graph, the only towns that are lower than us. And the notation under the graph said that they were only added recently. So I don't know exactly what recently means, but they're the only three towns that are lower per capita income, and I think per capita income goes to ability to pay, the residents for their ability to pay.
Can I just ask you, are you talking about the market basket for the town or the school?
I'm talking to school.
The school, okay.
Thank you. While we're 16th in home values, we're 11th in the tax burden. So we're higher with the tax burden than we are in home values. That's apparent from the information that's come out. The other thing that's a little bit troubling to me is that I looked up all the contracts I could find online that's in the school market basket. Every one of them goes to maximum pay, which I know a lot of the teachers are at. I'm a retired teacher from another school district, and I'm sensitive. I think teachers should get all they can, but we also need to respect the taxpayers of the community that they're in. So I looked at all the salary schedules, and all those contracts, those teachers who are making higher amounts, they need to have a master's plus 60 to get there. Westford is a master's plus 30. So they get there much quicker. So I think that when comparing the market basket, you should be comparing it to the master's plus 30 column. And I don't believe it's apples for apples if you don't. The other thing has been repeatedly stated that teachers' salaries are not keeping up with inflation. I get it. But neither is anyone's income probably in this town. And to fund a contract of that magnitude is troubling to a lot of people. I've reached out to a lot of people. We're not keeping up to inflation either. And the other thing that really, I think, has me asking questions is that you negotiated a reopening clause into the contract if the override passed. Now, it's pretty evident, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that when the contract was approved by the teachers union and the school committee, the funds weren't there to fund it. But if the override passes, from what I was told, the reopening clause will be another 4.6%, which is huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And that would bring them up to a 13.6% over 4 years. I don't know. I will never understand the reopening clause. And I guess the one question that I do have is that when you reopen the contract, I was president of the union at my school, and I negotiated. We once went to the superintendent to reopen the contract for something and honestly, I can't remember what it was. But his reply to us was, if we're reopening the contract for that one item, we're reopening the contract for everything that's in it. So is that the case for this reopener? That's my question. And you don't have to answer it right now, but I would like an answer at some point, if you don't mind. It's troubling. I think Westford has a higher tax burden than many, many, many of these towns in the market basket, where towns like Wellesley, which has $229,000 per capita income, Winchester $136,000, while we're down around $72,000. I could go on, but I don't want to take up your time. So those are my concerns, and I think there's going to be a lot of people hurt by this. I'm not saying an override isn't needed, I don't know where the override can be whittled down, but for that amount of money, it's really going to be difficult for a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, Tom?
Not to respond to Arnie, but just in order to get good answers to his questions, I'm wondering if we could just, is it okay if we follow up with you? And
Absolutely. I will.
Get-
I can email this to.
that'd be great, because you had a bunch of specific things, and I'd like to make sure we respond to them.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
By point. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Heather?
Can I just make a comment to the committee as well? Because I have read the task force thoroughly, and unfortunately, documents like this become outdated almost immediately. So we just recently had that shift from commercial to residential. So that actually changes our tax bill percentage of capita income as well. So even though we just got these results in October, we already have a higher burden based on that shift than what is in this report. Do you see what I'm saying, Tommy?
So this came up before, and maybe we can add to the question list. Given that the value for homes increased faster than commercial, the total assessed value of homes grew faster than commercial. So you're exactly right mathematically. But maybe we can give an answer on the scale of the difference. So that was a question that came up earlier. So it's a good question, and we should answer how much did this basically revaluation change the burden? Because it did change, but I think if people just look at their own tax bill, it may be hard to tell how much it changed. So why don't we take that on also as a question to answer?
Okay, sure.
May I respond to one thing?
Sure, come on up.
It's 2 seconds. Well, it's outdated, and I agree with you. When I looked up the per capita incomes, they were in $2022. So those are also outdated, and I am not thinking they went down. They had to go up. So you made a good point, and I appreciate it, but the per capita had to be higher.
Sure. Okay,
Save that.
thanks. That was the latest data, unfortunately, that we
Right.
had at the time. That's the latest that the state has. Okay, anything else for open forum? Nope. Okay, let's go on to our 7:05 agenda item, which is our capital planning committee presentation.
Just going to share my screen here. All right, so here we have the annual capital planning presentation. This is more of just an intro to the capital projects that you'll see coming before you during the warrant reviews for both the FinCom and Select Board. So just to start off, we have the list of everybody who's on the committee. Actually, most of the members are in this room, so I won't read them off, but we do have several people here, with Paul Harzer being our chair. All right, so we did hold 6 meetings between September and last Friday, and we reviewed each department's FY25 requests in detail and kind of looked at the 26 to 29 requests to see if there are any ones that should be moved up. We require quotes when we do recommend these projects. And then, we just have a good working relationship with other boards to make sure that we're utilizing as many funding sources as possible. When I go in more detail, you'll see we had some projects deferred to Community Preservation Act for consideration. We've used ARPA in the past, even though that balance is running a little bit low now. Perimeter Town Building looks at anything over 50,000. The school committee weighs in. And library trustees, pedestrian safety committee, whoever could give a recommendation. And then, of course, as always, with the DPW, we want to make sure that all of our public works projects are consolidated, and we always look for available grants and other funding sources when possible. So again, just great work by the committee and the department heads to pull this all together. We have the final recommendation in the financial model, so it does line up and it does fit within the funding model. Of course, we use free cash for most of the capital needs. If asked to reduce, we would reconvene and have discussions about that, but we don't think that anything on here is left off will impact operations too badly. Current capital stabilization balance is at $534,000. And we do have numerous funding sources, so it looks like a large number at $38.8 million. Most of that is one of the water projects that will be proposed here to combat PFAS. And as always, since we started this committee back in FY09, the 5-year capital requests have exceeded 50 million. The total here is 71 million, which I'll show you detail in just a second. And then, again, just the info that the department heads give us has been great. So we always have a very, they're always faced with a lot of questions from the committee, which is good. Each request is scrutinized, and they get back to us with the answers. So it's a little bit small, but it's probably easier to read online. This is the 5-year request summary that's in our capital database at IT controls. And as you can see, in the first year, we got the $40 million request, and then it's slowly decreasing in the outer years. Again, that's just that one water request that's really driving up this year. All right, I'm going to get into the recommendations a little bit, see if I can zoom in a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through these just so that you're introduced to them. The first two projects are the town computers and the school computers for $50,000 and $398,000 respectively. This is an annual replacement plan. Then we have camera replacements, which is an IT project. Basically, this will be an efficiency savings once this is implemented. Currently, we're using our own storage devices for these cameras. Mike Wells estimated we could save about $100,000 per year once we implement this system. So in addition to the $150 in free cash, he's applied for a $200,000 grant. We have the data air handler unit in Town Hall, which requires $20,000 to be fixed. The whole component inside is all decrepit and not functioning at all. So we're using some temporary means to keep the Town Hall vault cooled and temperature controlled, but it's not a long-term solution. So Jeff Goodwin requested $20,000 to repair that before the summertime. We have $40,000 for a new HVAC compressor at the Rogers Fire Station. The compressor controls all the living quarters is not working, so it's like they can't get heat in those quarters, so they're using temporary solutions as well. Going down here, we have cameras for DPW, which are in need of immediate replacement. So this will be a good pilot test for Mike Wells. He's working with Jeff Goodwin on this to make sure how the systems work and whatnot. So we're requesting $110,000 for that project. Going down here, we have the fire department service truck and plow for $100,000. This is a truck that pulls the foam trailer for chemical fires, and it's also out there plowing during snowstorms to make sure emergency vehicles can get down to the houses they need to get to. We have $125,000 for a special education electric van for a new program that the schools are putting on. It's a transition program for 18 to 22-year-olds, and this van will service those kids. Should say adults. Moving down to DPW, we have the Hartford Road traffic calming for $15,000. The Pedestrian Safety Committee has received a lot of complaints from residents, and they've had some concerns, so they want to do a speed study to see what improvements they can make to that area right next to the academy. We have $30,000 for the West Street and North Main Street pedestrian safety improvements. This is just a design for that, and it would include realigning the existing intersection and some property takings at St. Catherine's Church, and some rapid flashing beacons for pedestrian crossings in that area. And then for the Groton Road safety improvements, again, some residents reached out to the DPW, and they want to see some improvements between Farmers Way and Linwood Lane. So basically, it's to include the curb ramps at Farmers Way, a little sidewalk extension to connect the existing sidewalk, and some rapid beacons there as well. And we're
We
getting.
should just point out that Farmers Way is stony. So
Thank you.
everyone knows.
Yes. Yeah. Chime in if you have any comments.
Sorry,
That's fine.
because I was like, Farmers Way, where's that? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's
Stony Brook.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next up, we get into the couple vehicles for DPW. We have $140,000 for two 3/4 ton 4x4 trucks. They're replacing a couple of 2002 model vehicles in their fleet. Then we have $65,000 for a SUV or EV pickup truck. Again, this is for management staff and crew leaders to drive around that vehicle, and that would be replacing a 6-wheel dump truck. The Stony Brook Middle School wastewater treatment plant tank rehab. This is the fourth of 4 tank rehabs we've done since the water department took over for the schools the maintenance of those plants. It's for $700,000. And this is necessary to rehabilitate the steel tanks and some other pieces of equipment inside the tank. And it needs to be completed by their next permit renewal. And lastly, for the wastewater, we have $35,000 for the Blanchard Middle School for some tank repairs. It's to replace some sprockets, some gearboxes, chains, and other small things within there.
Do you need to scroll down, Dan?
There we go. Great, okay. So then we have another vehicle for the cemetery department, a 1-ton dump truck with a plow for $80,000. It's replacing a 2003 model. And then a supplemental for the Jack Walsh courts. Bids came in over what we had requested from CPA last year by the $67,500. So rather than go back to CPA, we thought we would supplement the request, the capital plan. And we're gonna go down to the next page. So all these requests are coming from free cash. Now we're gonna get into some other funding sources. There we go. So for the CPA projects, they haven't approved any of these recommendations yet. They're meeting tomorrow night to discuss these again. I'm not sure if they're actually going to approve them tomorrow night or vote on them, but these have not been approved by them yet. So for the Stony Brook Track Athletic Court replacement, we have $2.4 million. I did hear late this afternoon that Jeff Goodwin reduced his request by $80,000 to $2.32 million. But this project is to replace the track at Stony Brook and the existing courts outside there that were built when the school was originally constructed. Then we have $6 million for the construction of the American Legion fields. It's basically, they broke this project into 2 phases. And phase 1 is rehabilitating the existing fields and courts on the front parcel near River Street. And the second phase would expand into a second parcel in the back, which includes a cricket pitch, baseball field, and a number of other courts and whatnot, and parking enhancements. So this would have been the first of 2 phases.
And they're actually breaking this phase 1 down to phase 1A and 1B, and that they'll be presenting that to CPC tomorrow night. So this number most likely will be decreased by a certain number of millions.
Right. Then another CPA project for $510,000 for the Road and Bush courts, tennis courts. They're in need of replacement, and just crack sealing and whatnot will not fix those. And then we have playground improvements at the NAB school for it's actually $725,000 from CPC and a $100,000 grant that we received from the state. So that's under consideration too. They're planning to combine the 2 playgrounds that they have and move them further away from the driveway that parents drive down to pick up their kids. So it's a safety issue as well there. All right, getting into the enterprise, we have the construction of the 2 PFAS treatment plants for $24.5 million. This is going to this town meeting so we can get in a pipeline for the state revolving fund, which is a low to no interest loan from the state to help pay for these, which is a big deal on principal size of that amount. About 1.1 of this is for design, not eligible for those loans. But basically, there would be 2 plants constructed, 1 at Nutting and 1 on Forge Village Road. Below that, we have a supplemental for the town farm water tank, also coming from Water Enterprise for $50,000. The project was done previously, funded $1.2 million, and some necessary repairs are needed to complete the project. Some of the treatments they used did not work, so this should button that project up for us. Next, for the stormwater enterprise, we have a pole camera for $20,000. It's something that goes down and you can check out the drainage. It's replacing the existing one that's over 20 years old. We have a new ambulance for $532,000. And the prices of ambulances have just skyrocketed over the past year. So we don't have quite enough retained earnings to purchase this, so we're gonna put forward a bonding issue as a recommendation. And then in special town meeting, once ambulance retained earnings are recertified, we'll probably vote to appropriate those rather than bond for this. But the lead time on the ambulance as of yesterday was 30 months. So we wanna get this approved as soon as possible. And then, of course, we have $22,000 in radios for the ambulance to come from ambulance retained earnings. Next up is the $600,000 for the construction of the Plain Road Phase 2 pedestrian safety improvements. Design of this was paid out of the sidewalk gift fund, and we have authorization for the first part of this. So this section of the sidewalk will go from Grassy Pond all the way down to the Stony Brook Conservation Land right across from Depot. So that will finish up all of Plain Road. And then below that, our FinCom or Capital Planning Committee meeting on Friday, we had 2 6-wheel dump trucks that we earmarked for bonded, and so we removed those from the plan. And this, as of Friday, and then we have 2 other 6-wheel dump trucks below that we were planning to bond for as well. However, we did get the fair share apportionment for about $477,000, which is for road updates and whatnot to road construction. So what we decided with Kyle Fox, our DPW head, is to take the fair share apportionment, use that for the roads that were going to be fixed using the Chapter 90 funds, and then purchase the 2 6-wheel dumps using the Chapter 90 money. So we don't have to bond for any of the dump trucks. Below that, we have a mower for the Parks and Grounds Department, which we want to use field maintenance revolving to pay for that, for $20,000 plus. And lastly, we had discussed on Friday a townwide sidewalk assessment, which we were going to fund through Chapter 90, but the committee voted to not recommend that at this point. So those are all the projects, and here's just a small sampling of the projects that were not funded. DPW did have a long list of projects that we asked them to prioritize, and the highway front unloader came off, and as of Friday, the dump trucks came off. We had a portable changeable message sign for $20,000, the townwide assessment for $66,500 was not funded, and then we had some DPW projects for Fairview Cemetery that we couldn't get quotes on. People weren't willing to bid on those, so we pushed those off as well. And then, of course, the library heat pump replacements, which we usually fund through a reserve fund transfer if something happens to the library, but we're hoping that doesn't happen before they start construction. So that is the capital presentation.
You do? On to revenue, I think you're up next.
There's no questions first? I can't. 30-second.
I have a question.
There we go.
So you said the cameras, they were looking at a grant for $200,000 for the cameras.
Yep.
Would that also cover the DPW cameras or would that be like a separate project?
It's sort of a separate project, so I know Mike's working with Jeff Goodwin on those cameras, but I think they're trying to treat the DPW as sort of a pilot program to make sure everything works first, and then upgrade the other buildings. But I think the grant was only available for $200,000.
Okay.
So, we'd be contributing $260 total to those cameras, but it sounds like it's going to be quite the savings in the operating budget year after year to the tune of 6 figures.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dennis.
You mentioned Dan, you mentioned the fair share allotment that was given to you from the state, about $477,000. As I recall, we had a previous conversation with somebody, maybe I think it was the schools, that mentioned a fair share apportionment as well. Is that correct? So let me ask you this question. Do you have any discretion on where this money, do they earmark this money for specific things, or how is that distribution done?
For the road maintenance, there's a formula that they do. It's based on like number of miles and some other factor. There's a link I can send out actually that kind of has that information. But that's only for the DPW side. For the education component, they don't send it directly to us. We could indirectly receive some through grants or some other services, but we don't get an actual distribution.
That goes straight to the school superintendent?
No.
It's
No.
actually a formula used, and it's for pre-K through college, so it's not just K through 12, so it doesn't go directly to the towns or the municipalities. The state determines where the funds will be used, whether it be used for Chapter 70, whether it be used for pre-K education, whether it be used for community colleges, vocational tech. So we have no control over that educational apportionment.
And this grant has to go specifically to transportation, right?
The fair share transportation apportionment has to go to Chapter 90, which is road maintenance and vehicles associated with road maintenance.
Okay. And then the second question I have for you is I was looking at the capital expenditures here, and there's a significant number of DPW vehicles. So, do you have any idea what percentage of the vehicle fleet this replacement represents?
Less than 10%. Heather, you know this better than I do, probably.
I know we have 7
Kyle
pages of
Fox is on,
vehicles.
Kyle's on the line. I'm gonna see if I can promote him if he
Yeah,
can
if he
help
can
answer.
answer, that would be great.
When Kyle came on board, he went through all of the fleets for highway and DPW. My understanding is that a lot of the vehicles were one-use type of vehicles, so now that they're looking at the fleet, they're looking at purchasing vehicles that can be used all year long for multiple uses. Kyle, are you able to speak to the number of vehicles in the highway fleet at this point in time? We'll see if we can get him back.
Okay.
Well, he's doing that.
I think
guy.
Scott also has a
Yeah,
question.
I saw his hand up. Heather, do you want to?
I just,
Go ahead.
Dan, can you remind us when we can use capital stabilization?
When we did?
When can we?
In the past, we've used it for things that weren't planned, that kind of came up. So we used it for 63 Main Street. We used it for when we had to relocate the fire training tower. So that was used, and we plan to replenish the capital stabilization when Town Farm closes with Choice Inc. on that. So usually for projects like that. So
And how, and is there a basis around how much we want to have in that?
in the good years, we'd had about $1 million plus, but there were times when we had to tap it during these certain situations. So
I guess, is there policy that says it should be $1 million?
there's no policy there. Nope.
Can we get Kyle, or should we go on to Scott's question?
I see Kyle as a panelist now. Kyle, are you able to hear us and unmute?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Dennis, will you ask your question one last
Yeah,
time?
Kyle,
so
sure,
Kyle
I'll be
can
glad
hear
to.
you?
How are you, Kyle? I just wanted to ask you, in the capital budget of the vehicles that you're requesting, what percentage of the total fleet does this represent?
Yeah, good question, Dennis. I couldn't give you an exact number. I think Dan was definitely on the spot, and he said less than 10% of the fleet. We have about 100 pieces of vehicle and equipment between highway, parks, and cemetery. So you can see what number is there. So definitely less than 10%.
Now, you also have a certain number of vehicles in the pipeline that have not been delivered to you from the manufacturer, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We did receive 2 pickup trucks this week, and we're still waiting on a 1-ton dump truck and a 6-wheel dump truck that were ordered last April.
Okay, thank you.
Why don't we go to Scott Hazelton?
I guess it's related. So, as we recall, back when we formed, the DPW, we held off on buying equipment because we weren't sure what we might get for efficiencies in that combination. So I can see where now we're playing catch up. And so I guess I thought originally the request was for 4 trucks, and we're now getting up to 2. Is that correct? And how do we go from 4 to 2? If I'm right.
What do you want to?
Yeah, so there was an ask for 4. The DPW ranked those dumps number 2 in their capital requests. We came before capital last Friday with a proposal to fund 2 of them with the fair share apportionment and 2 via bonding. And the majority of the capital planning committee voted against that request and asked for a revote. I did express my concerns that these vehicles are taking quite some time to come in, that by the time we do order the 4, it might be out of time, but that was the desire of the capital planning committee at the point in time.
So I guess the follow-up then is, I mean, Judy was 7% of capital exists to advise her, not to rule her. So, I mean, is that a decision that can be brought to the select board for discussion, or is that a done deal in your opinion?
I wouldn't say it's a done deal. Dan and I have had conversations of how to potentially fund it, what the bonding interest rate would be. Certainly a conversation we can have with the select board in light of the budget conversations we've been having.
Scott, do you mind if I?
Go ahead, Heather.
This is Heather. I've been on capital for a number of years, and there are a number of pieces of equipment from DPW that we have added over time. One, I think 4, when you're talking a fleet of that type of truck, it's a big part of that fleet. I'm trying to pull up the schedule of our fleet vehicles right now. It just seems pretty excessive. And then in this year, when the original plan was to put it all through debt service, if you remember the show me the money conversations we've had, that comes right off the top. So it just doesn't seem fair to put those through. We've also had a number of vehicle accidents this year, 3, I think, and I forget what various departments was. So I've never been a big fan of bonding the vehicles either, so.
The other thing that I'll add is, when we were doing the budget task force and comparing other towns, the one thing that I couldn't really get a handle on was vehicle fleets. And I had asked Kyle about that at some point in the last couple of months. So it sort of felt like maybe we have more vehicles than other towns, but I couldn't get a good handle on that to really make that determination. So it might be interesting to sort of do at least a sanity check comparison.
Yeah, and Kyle did bring that to my attention when we were talking about initial capital requests, that Westford does have more vehicles than like-minded communities, but that's because traditionally the former highway director would purchase a vehicle for a single type of use. So Kyle and the former DPW director were looking at purchasing vehicles for multiple uses and then disposing of those old vehicles that weren't being used. So ultimately, we will have less of an amount of fleet once this transition period happens, but it is going to take some time.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
So you also got fleet because you got contractors, so your fleet can be smaller because you got more contractors, and bigger because you got fewer contractors, right? So I mean, it's a fungible number.
Dan, you don't have the fleet schedule where you could just put the highway piece up there, do you? I can't find it. I think it shows sometimes a little bit when you actually see it on screen and you're like, that's a lot of cars, or
Maybe
trucks.
while he's trying to find that. Scott, do you have anything else?
No, I'm all set. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Just a couple. First of all, on the ARPA, wondering what the balance of that is and when we need to use it by. So
Everything needs to be funded by December of 2024.
Okay.
Or allocated. I think we have a little over $300,000 left in the balance.
Okay. And then just an observation. With the funding of the playground at NAB, I remember a few years ago, parents at the day school had to fundraise because there was no funding or there was a limited amount of funding for that. So I just hope to have some equity in that planning. I think that the day school was a kind of a vandalism case, so it wasn't in planning, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Anybody else? Nope. Okay.
So I have the fleet list.
Okay.
And numbers 40 through 109 are DPW. So, that's 70 pieces of equipment right there. They have VINs and whatnot, so I don't know if you want to televise.
Oh.
Yeah. But
Yeah, probably not. Thanks, Dan.
And that list might not be current. We just went through an exercise to review all of our insured vehicles with what we actually have, so to see that efficiency. So we don't want to share this evening because it has been updated in the past
Okay.
week.
Great. Anybody else? Anything
Can I
else?
get a
before we-
copy of the update?
We don't have it quite
Okay.
finished, but yes.
We're all set with capital. I guess we can go on to revenue.
all right,
We good?
it's enough of a break. Yep. Let's get the screen back up. Okay, here we have the annual revenue presentation, and again, this is online. I'm not gonna read through everything, there's too much information here, but, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out if you need to know anything about this. Let's see if I can get this in a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. All right, so starting out here, this is just a summary of the different types of revenue available funds that we have to balance the budget. And other expenditures. So there are property taxes, local revenue, state aid, free cash, enterprise revenue, and other available funds are the categories here. And again, if you ever want to look at this as just a more detailed summary. So we're going to start off with the property taxes. Property taxes fund over 77% of our general fund revenue. That percentage has been increasing over the years, as the state does not keep up with their share typically. So, and I have out here highlighted the calculation for the levy for FY25. So what we do here is take the FY24 levy limit, add the 2.5 under for the increase, which is about $2.28 million. Then we add in our new growth estimate of $750,000. In this particular revenue analysis, since we didn't have an override number, I did not include it in here, but that if there is an override, that would add to the tax base. And then any debt exclusions that we have would be added on top of that to create our FY25 levy. If you want to ask questions as we're going, please feel free to interrupt. All right, and then here, I'm not going to read these to you, but we have different descriptions of the local revenue, and we'll updates next to each of them. Motor vehicle excise, diving into local revenue. This makes up over half of our local revenue amount. The actual amounts collected vary from the amount billed because not everybody pays their excise tax on time, but bills are due this month, so if you get those to avoid late payments, just please pay timely. It's my warning each year.
Help yourself out.
Local options excise, again, this is the hotel and meals excise tax. So in FY12, the town voted to begin collecting the additional 2% on hotels taxes and 0.75% on the meals tax. For FY25, we received the first 2 quarterly payments from the state. We were right where we were last year after 2 quarters with the hotel excise, within a few $100s. And the meals tax excise is now exceeding the pre-pandemic figures. It's up $48,000 from last year. So this is the most we've ever collected, and we're on pace for a projected FY25 budget to meet that. Again, a lot of that has to do with increased food prices as inflation's driving it up.
FY25 or FY24?
So the 24 budget, our actuals drive what we can set for FY25
Okay.
with the Department of Revenue. So,
Thank you.
all right, moving on. For penalties and interest, we're actually only at $77,000 halfway through the year, which is a little bit below our FY24 budget. We haven't had any major payoffs so far this year. In previous year, this varies from year to year, so we're usually we'll cautious with it in case we have a year like this. So again, our budget of 220 we're not close to yet, so we may have to make adjustments for next fiscal year's projections. The payments in lieu of taxes, these are various agreements that the select board have with nonprofit agencies, with MIT being our largest contributor. We usually see collection of this money in June, so it's not alarming that we haven't collected anything yet.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yep.
So do they also have some kind of benefit for the stormwater fee? Since they're doing a payment in lieu of taxes, do they get special treatment for stormwater as well?
I believe I think we're charging all the nonprofits.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Okay, on to fees, and these are just a sampling of different types of fees that are collected. Let's see, we're right on target halfway through the year. One thing we've seen is with less real estate transactions happening and rising interest rates is that we have less municipal lien certificates. People aren't refinancing their homes, and that's usually a major component of the fees that we collect. We see here. So, yeah, in past years, we've had upwards of, $38,000, $50,000, and we're tracking at about $10,000 halfway through the year. All right, cemetery revenue, we're never happy to receive this actually, but it is tracking about $22,000 halfway through the year. This can range between $27,000 and $42,000 has been the historic range, so we usually plug in about $30,000, $31,000 just to be on the safe side. Other departmental revenue, again, we don't budget for anything on this. If something comes in through like a rental or a lease, like the money we received in FY '22 was for renting the fire truck for a movie that was taking place, then it would go into this line item, but it's nothing we budget for.
Actually, Dan, on the cemetery revenue?
Yep.
Is that sale of lots? Is that fees?
This
combination?
is
What
grave opening, so sale of lots and perpetual care have their own different buckets they go into, which isn't part of the budget setting process. It's they have different master no laws.
This is in the general fund.
This is
correct?
general fund, yep.
Okay.
Then we get into licenses and permits
Before you go
here.
there, can I ask you one question about the municipal lien certificate fee? I think you mentioned it.
Yep.
So the reason that's going down is because you haven't seen the transfers that you normally would, or is that, does that involve liens put on the property, or is that?
It's making sure that there are no liens in the property. So when people go to close on a mortgage or to refinance their home, they have to pay a fee to the town to check to make sure that there's no
I get you.
outstanding
Okay.
fees out there.
I understand. Thank you.
Skip ahead to licenses and permits. So we are tracking ahead of schedule here. We've collected 2/3 of our estimated inspection revenue halfway through the year. We currently have 5 approved subdivisions with a total of 23 building lots remaining this fiscal year, with 5 at Colonel Rolls Drive and 15 at St. Paul Lane. Wendell Place, which is formerly 73 Nutting Road, is another potential subdivision for 23 single-family lots that will most likely take place in FY '25 if everything moves forward. Development's not consistent from year to year, so we want to be cautious with our forecasts when projecting the licenses and permits. See here, special assessments. We budget for what is due in the fiscal year, but of course, some people may pay off their betterment amount early. So it's just a small amount. It's only about $4,900 that we have budgeted in FY '24, so it's not a huge impact here. Fines and forfeits. So these are the fines that we collect in town, with most of them being motor vehicle fines from the police, and they'll vary based on the staffing levels of the department. So if they're fully staffed, they tend to collect more fines. Investment income. This is a very interesting one, and this is one of the slides that I like to go back to FY '06 on, just to show what we've collected in the past 18 years. So the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 11 times since FY '22, and we're starting to see a substantial increase in investment income as we're getting rates between 3.25% and 5% as of last month. And this is up almost a full basis point from last year. For the final budget, we are going to increase the projection to about $598,000. We feel it's a short-term solution to help offset the lack of additional state aid, which I'll talk about in a second, and the increase in the Neshoba budget. However, rates are projected to decrease in the near future, so it's not a multi-year solution. We're hearing like rates may drop as much as a basis point by next year, so we have to build that into the model as well. So, but for a short-term solution, this will work. All right, so for the next portion is the miscellaneous recurring revenue. Everybody knows about the slugs that we use, state and local government securities, to pay for the Stony Brook and Rita Miller and Christa Foley schools. We paid that bond off last year, so we don't really have to talk about it anymore because this isn't part of local revenue assumption. So it's great the bonds are paid off, and that debt fell off the debt exclusion, but that was a major component of this. So I kept it here for one more year just to let you know that this is no longer contributing in FY '24 and beyond. And then we have other types of recurring revenue, such as Medicaid receipts for the schools. We have a Medicaid reimbursement program for the ambulance enterprise, which comes into the general fund. And of course, the Neshoba pays us for the student resource officer for their school.
Is that fully loaded?
Yep.
So includes benefits?
Yes. And then we have miscellaneous non-recurring revenue. So most of this is made up of tax title. We may have things come in such as like a sale of vehicles or equipment, but these are revenue streams that the Department of Revenue does not let us build into future budgets. So it's really one-time revenue that's a hit to free cash at the end of the year. It builds it up. So, so far this year, we've brought in 143,000 halfway through the year.
Is that normal, or,
It
Are we low?
really varies, which is why, you know.
I mean, to be like not even halfway through the year?
So
Or-
every year is a little bit different. So
Ranged from.
in '23, we had a lot more tax title payoffs. So this year, again, with like the penalties and interest, it's a much lower rate so far this year. So
And it looks like it goes between 200 and 600 in the past,
yeah,
well,
Oh,
8
that's
years.
not an estimated, okay.
yeah, those are actuals in the outline in the previous years. All right, and this is just a summary of local revenue, which I will not repeat. All right, getting into state aid. See, we did get Governor Healy's initial budget recommendation that was released in January, and for Chapter 70, so we are receiving the additional $30 per student, which is the minimum. It comes out to $132,870, or a 0.75% increase, so not what we were hoping for. For unrestricted aid, there is a 3% increase, which is a total of $26,218. So overall, revenue is increasing $214,000, but the state assessments, which they back out of the monthly payments, they're increasing by 20%, or $119,000. So the net increase with the governor's budget is only $95,000 for FY '25.
So, I just want to make a point that the money coming from state government to us is increased by 0.7%. Not the inflation rate, but just far less than the
By how much?
0.7%, that's what you said, right?
0.75% is the Chapter 70, so according to their formula, yes.
Which is not even close to the inflation rate.
No,
That's right.
it's not close to the inflation rate when inflation was 2%, so, no. So the state has been falling behind for years and years on this.
But overall, we are getting more, like, it's increased from our projections, or, because I thought it wasn't.
So the revenue was, I think we're getting 8,000 more in the general fund revenue. However, our state assessments went up by about 88,000 higher than we had
That's kinda
projected.
what I had thought. So it's
So we didn't plan on a 20% jump in those state aid
Yeah.
assessments.
So our state aid is lower than we estimated
Then we.
overall, our
Right,
net.
correct.
The net is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, that's what I thought, all right.
So to fix that, we had that wiggle room in investment income, so
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
seeking to bump that up to help cover that cost. We don't have to take away any other services in the meantime. It's sort of an easy solution for right now. All right, and here's a history of the graph for state aid. That red section is school construction, which is accounted for separately. So once we paid, and we used to receive payments for Westford Academy rehabilitation. So once that loan was paid off in FY '20, you see the decrease in state aid. All right, getting into enterprise here. This table shows the actual revenue that was collected between FY '16 and FY '25. It's actually a budget for '24 and '25. The bottom table shows the general fund subsidies that the enterprises have received since FY '16. So if you're ever looking for a subsidy and just looking to a revenue report, I know those are requested a lot. This is where I always look. So the budget, sorry, go ahead.
So is it possible to actually total them on the sidewise as well, like how much recreation has gotten a subsidy over the 10-year period? Like if you see the bottom table, you have a summary column top to bottom.
Yep.
Also, we can sum to left to right, so we know that how much, let's say stormwater got a subsidy for the last 5 years, 10 years. We can just say if there is trend going or not like that.
10-year subsidy?
Here, no, here you have 5 years, right? Yeah, I can take 5 years.
I think it's just interested in a sum,
Yeah,
a sum of
FY
the
16
10-year
to FY
running sum.
21.
Sure.
Yeah.
Add that on. Again, the information's here. We have the subsidies for FY '25 that are recommended in the budget before any changes take place. This is based on Kristen's December 12th, 2023 budget. So it's 110 for recreation, 786 for ambulance, and the standard 600 for stormwater, which we said we would keep in there when the stormwater enterprise came into fruition.
When are we reassessing the stormwater fee? Are we gonna keep this
coming up.
600?
For this budget, we are.
But I mean, like in the future.
So I
is
think it was
the select board
after
gonna
3
be-
years, the select board was going to take a look at it again, so I think we're almost due to do that.
Okay.
Is the water rate is increased and that's an effective FY '24, is that right?
Correct.
But we only have the budgeted numbers at this point.
Right.
Is the
Yeah.
water, is that tracking with the increase towards the budget? I'm just curious.
I believe it is, but I could check, so.
Yeah, we haven't heard that they're down collections. I think we would have heard that if they weren't receiving them.
Okay.
So, but we can definitely check on that.
Yeah, I was just, because I'm just looking at like, it's 20% increase, is that right?
22%.
22. So if I took the 23 actual and multiplied by 20%, I'm not getting 5.4. I'm getting a little less than that, so that's why I was curious.
So it went into effect July 1st, but everyone's billed on a 3-month cycle, so there's a little bit of lag behind that.
Okay.
And FY '23 is a very wet year too, so I think people were watering their lawns less, so we brought in less revenue, so. Like 20 and 21, we had 4.7, 4.6, which was at the same rate, so that was on the lower end. Here's just some more info on the enterprises that I wrote that I won't go through at this meeting, but it's available on there online. And then we have other available funds that we may use to offset the budget. We have here things that we've historically used for our operating budget, like the senior center revolving. This year we have some offsets for a couple pilot programs from personal services. One was for the East or Stony Brook Conservation Land, to have a person or two out there on the weekend patrolling and collecting receipts. And then also for the full-time hours for the town nurse to offset that. And the Board of Assessors have looked at their overlay each year and have agreed to release some to apply against the operating budget to help offset some costs there.
Can I make a comment on that? I don't know when the time to make this comment is, but one of the things I'd asked Dan for in some of my review is this other available funds. And there's, similar to schools, kind of a long list of funds. And I'll just go to cemetery since that's easy, since we just talked about it. You know, we talked about that one amount that goes right to the general fund, but there's also sale of lots that's in an account, and then there's the
Perpetual care.
perpetual care, the part you can't use and the part you can use. So some of those things are not factored into this budget, and very little from, you know, there's only these 3 items from the table. So I think we need to look at some of those things a little more, and even incorporate into kind of a standard annual offset. So the nurse, I'll point to too, they have the vaccine revolving fund, and it's growing. I think it's got 100,000 in it now, and they haven't even received their revenue for the year. So I think things that are continuing year after year after year, some piece of these amounts that are growing should be allocated against our budget. And we'll probably get into details, I guess, when we go through recommendations, but I just want to make the comment in this section.
All right, next up, we have the Community Preservation Committee. We still have just enough room to show the complete history, going back to 2003. So overall, on our 32.7 million that we raised locally, we've received 15.2 million from the state. So we've gotten a great return on investment. They don't fund it 100% anymore, but it's still a very good return that we're receiving. So this year actually dropped a bit. In 23, we received 934,000. It dropped to 517 this year, just because the state did not supplement the amount that goes. Most of the fees raised from the state are from registry fees that they collect. So if transactions go down, the amount available funding is down. So again, it's a little bit less than last year, but we still have a very good return on that. And the last slide here is the free cash. It's not the last slide, but free cash used to balance the operating budget. Since FY15, that's a practice we've discontinued. We did use a little bit during the first year of COVID, $352,000 to balance the budget, but $110,000 of that was from the snow and ice deficit. So that's something we usually fund out of free cash regardless. And so, you know, we're still looking on pace not to use free cash in FY25 to offset this. And then at the end, this is just a summary of all the revenues showing where we're at. The FY25 budget is at $137 million, which is artificially low because we don't have the CPA recommendation yet for the projects. Once they vote that, we can build that into the model and we can update this summary. So, all right. And that is the end of revenue.
Any other questions?
One little one. Can you, there's one in the, going back, Dan, to capital planning. There was a reference to pay-as-you-go. And can you give me a little explanation of what that specifically means?
It means not bonding, basically, like using free cash to pay for.
Okay.
capital
Paying cash
that
is what it
come
comes
up.
down to.
Paying cash, basically,
Yeah,
yep.
okay, all right.
Dan, for people that have heard about the legislation that was introduced to potentially raise the ability to increase the meals tax, can you just help people, if they don't know, tell them about it or remind them of it?
Sure. So the governor released new legislation proposal. It has not been approved yet, but part of it is to increase the meals tax from 0.75% to 1%. So doing the math, looking at that, that would be roughly, I think, $100,000 was the math on that. And then it was increasing the hotel tax from 6% to 8%. Again, that would be about $200,000 total. And then there's also a projection, did I get it right? 1% increase for the,
So it would be, yeah, 105,000 for meals, almost 200,000 for, I'm sorry, 105 for hotel, almost 200,000 for meals. And then if there's a new 5% motor vehicle excise, that would be another almost 200,000.
so 500,000 potential revenue streams out there with this legislation.
But the town meeting would have to approve that if the legislation is approved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's at least a year or
That's
more
a
away.
FY
but
26
It's
revenue.
maybe in the pipeline if the town, if it passes the legislature and the town votes to approve it.
Anybody else? Anything on capital and revenue? Okay. So, let's go on to discussing our findings from our FY25 budget hearing. And there was, you know, in the packet, there was sort of a starting point that I gathered from our meetings, from hearing comments from FinCom members. Some members did send me their specific comments. So again, this is a starting point based on what I heard in the budget hearings. And the biggest thing that I heard from a lot of members was to reduce that override ask. This wording, the wording in the packet is probably not, you know, set in stone. I mean, I mentioned the 8, you know, changing the 8 million to 6 million, but the 8 million is not set in stone, and so it's a little fuzzy in how to actually say it, but basically to reduce that number is what I was hearing from FinCom members. And then to kind of back up, to sort of show our work in a way, or back up the math as to maybe, you know, where we saw places where you might be able to reduce, and to just give some indication. Again, as we were going through the budget hearings, I kind of listened to what everyone was saying and grouped things into different categories, just to give us a starting point. I don't want to get into the, you know, pennies here and there. It's more general kind of categories. If there's big things missing, or if there's things we don't agree on, you know, we can kind of go through that. So Dan, if you want to bring that up just so that we can see it, and I'll just kind of go through how I grouped things. Again, after listening to you, this isn't, just out of my head. It was what I thought I was
And
hearing
Christina,
from the committee.
before we start, I just want to remind the public who might be watching, the select board voted at their January meeting to reduce the override budget by $500,000. So just want to make sure that
Sure.
that's just reminded in the public realm this evening.
And was that, I thought that was to reduce the FY25 budget, but not necessarily the override
It was just the
number?
override budget. It was the override budget.
But the
was
budget,
the-
not
The
the.
budget, not the
Right, it
number.
was the budget.
It was the
Yes,
budget, not
okay.
the number.
Yep,
Correct.
exactly.
The needs request, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, the Prop 2.5 governed budget, that's fixed. So
Yeah.
we were working on
Yeah.
the second budget, and we asked for it to come down based on some of the input you provided and other things we've done
Right,
along the way.
the number of the override is still, will be discussed with the select board on
Yes.
Tuesday night. But
Yep.
yes, the override budget number was requested to be reduced by
Gotcha.
$500,000. So
Thank you.
we'd love your input on that.
Yep.
So that you don't have a separate, and 1 second. The town's piece was not 500, that was the total between the town and the schools,
That is
right?
correct. Town and
That
schools.
was the request of the select board. made.
Operating budget reduction in total by $500,000.
Have you identified any areas yet before you hear our suggestions, or?
We're working on it, and we've
Okay.
had discussions with Dr. Chu, but like we said at the very beginning of these public hearings, we want to hear all of the ideas and thoughts before we make a final presentation.
I just wondered if you all had something that you thought would be,
We are
worth
working on that. I don't have
highlighting
anything this evening to
over-
show you, but we definitely, Dan and I have sat down for multiple hours to discuss going through that reduction.
And Dr. Chu did present at school
Right.
committee for
Correct.
what their portion of that
Yep.
500
Yes.
would be, so.
So I'm going to go through kind of these categories here, and again, I tried to pull it up at a higher level because I don't, we shouldn't really be talking about individual, line items, but just to get an idea of where we saw things. The other thing I'll note is that everything in here was recommended or was offered up, let's say, in the Proposition 2.5 restricted budget. So there's nothing really new, I guess I'll call it that. So there, as we discussed various departments, there were some open positions that I heard FinCom members kind of say, well, maybe we don't fill those, and maybe we kind of see how it goes and readjust. So that was that category. The meetings and conferences, pretty self-explanatory, although I think there may have been some things that were maybe called training or something like that. And the other thing that we heard was that if we reduce those lines to the constrained budget numbers, that we're not going to jeopardize any crucial certifications or accreditations or anything like that. Office supplies, some of that is your typical, office supplies, but I think there was also some things out of technology that I kind of grouped into that category as well. Seasonal staff, there was some seasonal staff in DPW that I heard some concerns about from FinCom members as far as maybe being able to cut back that and, reduce our lawn mowing or fertilizing or whatever. There were also some line items that seemed to, didn't quite match historical spending, so kind of just brought those down into what had been done in the past. There were a few things that I did classify as a service reduction. It was, library hours, there was the Board of Health dental program and the strategic retreat. And again, I'll just sort of say that, these are suggestions. Nothing set in stone. Next thing is overlapping services. There were several mental health positions across various departments. And it just seemed a little confusing, so there may be something done. The recreation enterprise subsidy we talked about last week, about using the rec retained earnings for the $75,000 subsidy instead of that coming from the general fund. Some other additional funding was using $10,000 from the cemetery's expendable funds, whichever that is. I think we heard that potentially $7,000 to $10,000 could be used annually without impacting anything. We've done this in the past. We've reduced our OPEB contributions from the 1.4 million that's in the budget down to 1 million, so it would be $400,000 that we would reduce it potentially just in this 1 year, with the idea that, you know, if we could supplement that with free cash at special town meeting, we would do that. And it would basically be a way to kind of bridge that gap to reduce, hopefully, the override ask until efficiencies could be realized, and then go back up to what our policy says. So all of that was more for the town side or shared. As far as the schools, we've got using the excess school revolving fund balances, specifically transportation, athletics, activities, and music fees and integrated preschool, I think, were the concerning ones. And again, as a one-time bridge until efficiencies were realized. And then another $500,000, which I didn't even attempt to give any sort of categorization. That can be up to the discretion of the school committee and the superintendent. So again, it's just a way to sort of show some math that adds up to almost $1.7 million. So I'll pause here and open it up to the committee to, for thoughts and reactions.
I just have before we kind of dive in, Dan, do you have the slide that shows the tax impact of the override on a medium household? Like,
$56,000.
It's $112 per million of override
okay.
It's about $800
on a house valued at $756,500.
Okay.
plus the.
Yeah, I think we had, at some point when we know the override number, we had sort of asked for a comparison, kind of going out, but, right? Sorry?
Okay. So for me, it's a difficult thought out, but it's somewhere, I'll explain this. So the needs-based budget is the override budget, right? And the Prop 2 and 2.5 budget is the low budget. The needs-based budget, in my mind, is too high, okay? Not in the sense of meeting the expenses, but from the palatability perspective of the people who are funding it. So by making this choice too high, we might be implicitly forcing ourselves to 2.5 budget. So I think this body should try to figure out what's the maximum we can pass and support our town's expenses and budget. And that should be our goal. That's where I want to see $500,000 reduction. It seems more like I'm going to have made an effort, but not really did something meaningful. At least that's my perspective. That's all I want to say.
Dennis?
Yeah. I think the first thing that's really striking is the relationship between the state revenue and our own revenue, right? I mean, first of all, this is a significant walk back by the legislature on supporting municipalities in light of Proposition 2.5. Now, that leaves us in a bind because everybody here that's got any experience with town government knows that you can't support your full operation off the property tax. I think Kristen made a statement, it was about 77%, which is actually high. Usually, ballpark was 75%. So there's going to have to be some, I think, for town staff, the Board of Selectmen, I think you're gonna have to really start thinking about some structural changes in the way that we do business, because if this, I don't see the legislature reversing itself, at least not in the near future. So that's the major policy idea. But the other thing that seems to me that we can make some gains on is in our contract management. All right, so we try to stagger them. We still have. I mean, the contracts should be. I mean, if you were having a textbook, contracts a max should be 3% a year on anything, and the contract should be about 3 years for each, and then you stagger those contracts out so that you're not having all your contracts coming due in the same year. Therefore, you can manage this a little bit better. When they go beyond the 3%, you're in a different. I'm not familiar with. Up until recently, I have not heard of contracts exceeding 3.5 in any government union up until maybe the last 5 years. That's something to keep in mind. So the other thing is that in the contracts with regard to vendors, I would recommend that you pursue, again, term contracts as much as you can. I know that I think Mike Wells indicated that there was probably an old standing practice that, well, we don't want to get involved with that because it's a little involved. I think at this point in time, we got to revisit that, and we got to start looking at maybe that's a policy we should have. And the last thing on vehicles is your vehicle turnovers should be 10% is a little high for vehicle turnovers if you're doing that all the time, especially big capital issues like fire apparatus and highway vehicles. You should try to reduce that, get a better. I think the movement towards more universal or multiple use type vehicles is a good idea. That's a very good thing, and I think that's a good thing to be able to keep your eyes on. And there's there's some other issues too that I'll raise later. But that in general, that's it. The contracts, management of the vehicles, which will help you manage the fuel, and then just a realization that we are facing a serious problem that's not going to go away. And looking at these, looking at the big three: the inflation, the energy, and then the healthcare costs, along with state mandates. I think these are only going to get worse, not better. So, don't envy your job.
So I'll just say that, again, I attended the school committee meeting, saw what was presented as additional reductions, and on the school side, it is starting to get into potential significant student impact if we reduce any additional there. Beyond the idea of looking at those revolving account balances and maybe finding a way to supplement for one-time purchases. There was definitely a fear of using those for operations and basically creating a cliff next year and just kicking the can down the road. So I appreciate that. Other than that, I second I echo the sentiment that 500,000 this year, it was a starting point. I think that the town needs to do better as a whole between both town and school because all the taxpayers are having to do the same thing. We're having to make choices. So it's not a good position to be in. Yeah, and I think going forward, it's that whole idea if you can either reduce costs or increase revenue, and maybe we are, through those efficiencies that hopefully we'll see in the coming years, increasing revenue in different categories and changing that pie just a little bit. The only other one that's not listed here that I really would like to see us work towards, and it may not reflect in the initial budget, but maybe some reallocation at town meeting, is the fleet fueling. I do think that there's some efficiency there that should be relatively, and I use that loosely, relatively easy to achieve.
Which we have incorporated the fleet fueling.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that's my comments at this point.
No, I think, I have to say, I support that, you know, we need to whittle this down. I think 8 million is too much, in light of some of our other debt exclusions as well. And that's the other piece that we have to remember is we have, you know, a library still to pay for and things like that. I am a little concerned with some of the school revolving fund balances. I don't support, you know, one-time funds for operating, but it is hard to, when you look at some of these balances that, you know, are totaling close to $2 million, and then we're asking the town for an override. So there might be some area, I guess, and there's a little, I got a little confused of why, you know, we're collecting fees and then not always spending the money, because the revolving accounts are supposed to be in and out and not savings accounts. So that was a little concerning. I think there might be a little balance of using some of these one-time balances to lessen the override amount and then looking towards some of the efficiencies in the out years, so.
I have a question. The 8 million to 6 million, does the 8 million include avoid an override the second year? Is that the number that we came up with?
So-
That if we do this, then we might avoid an override the second year?
So what Chris and Dan are currently working on are a couple different sort of illustrative options of override size and service reduction. And so the original idea was on a 2-year term, if you did an $8 million override, you might cover that gap. But we're going to get into when we get into our meeting, we're going to have a couple different options that we're going to focus on and discuss.
Well, if that, at the 8 million level, that would cover that gap, then this 1.6 million doesn't mean anything. And coming back to 6 million doesn't mean anything, because 6 million, to me, should be the minimum, the maximum we would think about. It would get us to the next year. I don't want to be, I look at this burden of the taxpayer. You're adding $765 per the average household with the, what, is that the 8 million? That's the 6 million? That's the 6 million.
Whatever the
right?
number times 112
That's the 6
is
million.
how you get there, yeah.
Well, every year we add another 300 or 400. That's just within the Prop 2.5. So we're talking about $1,000 per household if we do the 6 million. If the 6 million is what it takes to get to the next year, and we have to do an override next year, I say we start from the 6 million and reduce beyond that. This is just my
Yeah.
assessment of the situation.
Yeah, I think it'll
And
be.
I think we should have that number, excuse me,
Yeah, go
Tom, that number of what it's going to cost the taxpayer right over here on the side of every decision we make, and say, this is going to do this to the average household. And keep that in mind, because, I just think that we should be starting at 6 million and going lower than that. And and like Ingrid said, there's some revolving funds. I think we should say, okay, and then we got to do our share on the town side, but the schools, I think, need to do it on their side.
Oh.
But that's just my thinking on it, I'm sorry.
No, please, don't, go on.
It's a good suggestion, something we're committed to, is trying to sort of dollarize
Yeah.
what's happening with each of
Yeah.
these choices, so I
And then,
agree with that.
Henry brought up the fact, I think, and I mentioned it before, is we think about, the excluded debt. We may need to look further downstream and say, what are we doing with that? And how much is that adding?
Right.
I mean, the Halligan days are over. I mean, I think this is going to be ongoing for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future.
I mean, the excluded debt, we had asked once, and I think that's a great idea, to kind of have that calculator going on the side of this is what it's gonna do to the taxpayer,
Yeah.
including all of the excluded debt that we already know about, like the library, the roof
Right.
debt. I think there's maybe a
Yeah,
couple.
I just want to think, I looked at some of this, we try to compare it with other communities. And if you look at, like the 12 that we're in that DART thing, we're not up, we want to go to the mean as far as, say, the contracts for the school. But but we're down at the lower part of the average, income for the average household. We're not at the mean, we're down here. I don't think we should be looking to the mean, we should be looking down here. So I just got some concerns.
And we'll have a chance to deliberate all that when we talk about
Okay, I know, I
budget.
just,
Okay.
And just to touch on something that you said, sure, I'll put it in quotes, $6 million is not a set number. It's more of a, please try to reduce it, and here's kind of
Yep.
here's sort of a starting point. Because you're right, trying to balance what the town needs versus the residents and what it's gonna do to them.
yeah, I think that's,
Sure. Ingrid?
I just had a question, this is for the select board members. Have you looked at different types of kind of override options in the sense of tiers and
Right,
is
both
that
by-
gonna be part of your discussion or?
Yeah, both by structure and amount. It's a little bit hard to talk about these without also talking about the service impact.
Right.
So we need to show, if you have a high, medium, and low, you have to show the low override and what that means to services, like what it's going to mean in the classroom, what it's going to mean in public safety, same for medium. So we're going to give that context of, I think we're going to present ranges like we're talking about here. We're not, there's not an infinite range of opportunities. So we'll show those, we'll try to dollarize them in terms of impact to the taxpayer. We'll include what's going on with debt falling off and debt coming back on so people can see that. And we'll expose the trade-offs. And that's the discussion we're going to have is what's the right choice for the town in terms of what we're asking for the taxpayer both to contribute and also to give up. And we need to see both.
Yep.
So I really, first of all, I just, since I'm already talking, I really appreciate the work you've done in this cycle. It's more than twice as much work. We're very grateful. There's a lot of really good suggestions here. So I know we've talked about this input a couple of times already, and we understand the seriousness of the situation we're in. So you will see many of these suggestions show up in proposals, but we'll also be talking about what happens on the service side in a concrete way so we can see the whole picture.
And out over the next 3 years. I
And
think
it's gonna
that's
cover-
what's missing from here too, is.
Thank you,
look
Christina.
over 3
We're also
years,
going to
yeah.
look at 25, 26, 27, and a little bit of a look to 28, because we don't want to solve something or take an action that trips us and throws us into a ditch immediately next year. So you're going to see that too. You're going to see a little bit over time.
I'll go to Dennis and then I'll come, yeah.
So I would like to remind the select board about revenue, because it's a tricky thing. There's always been references already towards, the ability to increase the revenue on the commercial businesses and the hotels, all right? And this is a trap that a lot of policymakers fall into when they just think, well, we'll just tax. Because what happens is, you've already seen that our tax burden is now shifting from the residential, from the commercial end of it, increasing more of the residential, right? A lot of that is because of the business situation within Massachusetts. A lot of these businesses are closing. The restaurants are a large part of our business here. I mean, there's a lot of restaurants here, a lot of people like to go out. You hit them with too much and they close, that's gonna be another drop in revenue. So there's a really tight balance that you have to keep between any sort of increase in taxation and what's the impact gonna be with regards to the taxpayers themselves. Not to mention the fact that people can just pick up and leave and go up to New Hampshire a few miles away. The other thing we have to be concerned about is we have to be concerned about what the state tax policy impacts are gonna be. There's gonna be revenue issues coming down from Beacon Hill that are gonna affect everybody in the state, and that's something we're gonna have to consider as well, because that will could potentially impact who comes here and resides, who doesn't come reside, whether all I can remember is Governor Cuomo praying for the folks with wealth not to leave the state of New York. We may be facing a situation like that too here as well. So something to keep in mind.
So I have a couple of small points for you to consider while you're doing that. The first one is, when we have,
It won't help. It won't.
That's just for the cable.
so when we have a tax base, there is a lot of other things that base on the tax base as a percentage. So approximately we spend $10 million of a tax base on capital, about 3 to 5% on our debt exclusion, etc. Right? So if we increase our tax base by 7%, that's not the only thing that's going up by 7%. There are a lot of other things going up by 7% as well, right? So I just want to make sure that you consider that point as well when you say increase one thing. There are a lot of other things that goes some other.
No, good point.
There's a question from the member of the public, so whenever you're
I'm
ready.
about to
and then-
complete my second one.
Oh, okay, go ahead, keep going.
Sorry about that. The second one is when we have to eliminate few things from budget. I like to request start eliminating the least impactful ones than the most impactful ones. Like if you want to eliminate 50 cents from a meal, eliminating salt would be a lot more painful than eliminating the cheese that you sprinkle on top.
Yeah, no, good suggestion to make sure we're starting with things that have least impact in terms of benefit.
And those are my only points.
The only problem is we'll get into, that'll end up in debate at town meeting because what's impactful for one is not for
See,
another. So.
as a finance committee, I am not there. I am not in the
Yeah.
day-to-day getting my hands at it. That's
Right.
the only things I can do is what I can see from my perspective.
Correct.
And I had to rely on you to take that actual implementation.
Do you want to
Yeah,
do
just,
one more before you go to the?
just remember, with taxation, you can win the argument and the vote and still lose. Because that percentage that didn't go along with it says, I'm out of here. So that's the thing you gotta keep in mind, all right?
Why don't we go to the?
So there's a question from Jamie Holmes. She says, I wonder about the 500,000 in schools. Is this in addition to the 350 that they were requested to cut? What are the recommendations on cuts there? The comp reserve interventionist seems very open-ended. So this is the first time that we're all hearing about the 500,000 request from the schools. My understanding is that the 350 is insulated within that 500,000 and not in addition. I'm not.
Probably, I guess this is all a little squishy because we don't have.
It's just a
firm numbers.
recommendation.
It's just a
Right.
recommendation.
Right.
The main recommendation is, I think, and we'll, flesh this out, but I think the main recommendation is that Finance Committee is saying, please don't go over $6 million for your override ask.
Or
Is that-
work
or-
closer, and for me, it's the 500 was a good starting point, but I think it's.
Well, I
can
think they're
even
two
be
different
more.
things is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah,
I
one's a
think-
fiscal 25 issue and one's an
Exactly.
override
So-
size
Right.
issue. So
Right.
we're listening.
So if that reduction on the school side, if that 350, if you can get to the 6 million or less override, baking that 350 into this 500, great. But it's difficult to know without seeing the out year. So I think that's kind of what I'm, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I just encourage, I know that you've all been busy enough, but just coming back to the idea of we really need to look at the impact side to see if that feels like the right balance. Because just to say, I mean, I would like to pay less, I'd like to pay zero. But the impact that would have on services and what it's like to live here might be way beyond what we want to accept.
Right. And
So
that
just to call out to make sure when we go through these different options, kind of a high, medium, low option, we're looking carefully at how people are going to live differently, what students' experience can be like, because it's a difficult choice and tough trade-offs are going to be in that.
And what I was thinking with this was really more of a back of the envelope kind of a, well, if we can reduce this for FY '25, maybe that math works out so that you can reduce the override and it still carries forward. But again, we need to do that.
Yeah,
that
I think, I
calculation.
mean, I think we hear you in this, so I
Yeah.
appreciate you for being so thoughtful and so clear.
Thanks. Heather?
Can I just get clarification on what our delta is for FY '25 and then, the additional for '26 and
The delta
27?
from the,
The 8 million is for the 3 years.
No.
well,
No, that's just the first year.
No,
no, it's not,
no,
it's
it's
not.
not.
So it's a complicated thing. I guess what I'd ask is if you could look at what we're presenting in the meeting, we're gonna lay out all the numbers very clearly. It's sort of difficult to just like pull threads out of the air with that all laid out on one sheet. So it'll just be easier to go through and understand. But to answer your question, the 500 request from the select board was specifically from what we were calling the needs-based budget or the override budget. That both the schools and the town had proposed amounts for that. When we looked at those together, we said, we can already tell that we need to begin to trim back both fiscal '25, '26, '27 no matter what the override is, we're gonna have to be doing reductions in each of those years to get all the way through the next 3 years. And so the request was from the existing pending budgets for town and schools, for the needs-based or the override case, we need collectively to pull that down by 500,000. That's what the select board asked.
And what is that delta though, just for FY '25? Like between our revenue and the needs?
I think it was like 5.5.
It's a little bit less than 5 million,
Yeah.
something like 5 million.
So 5 million roughly.
That's for 26 or 25?
Because I
For
remember,
25. For 25, the difference between the new request that we've made to the town schools for this needs-based budget and what the current revenue projection is just under $5 million.
okay.
So part of the override, if we pass it, would be, we haven't finalized any of these numbers, but
Understood.
would be through some combination of cuts in this year and later years and the override money to make sure we stayed at balance at the end of the 3-year cycle. If that makes sense. The amount of money in the override, what we're saying is we need to raise an amount of money in the override that through that and cuts will get us through the next 3 years. So if you do a smaller override, it'll mean bigger cuts in each of the next 3 years to get to balance. That's what we're gonna be showing you when
but
we present it.
some of the adjustments that are made, like some efficiencies and some improvements would carry forward. So even if there's
Yep.
a number shown, it may not impact year 3 because it's an overall. And I'm gonna go to what Dennis said real quickly. He said something about, restructuring and that sort of thing. And I do think we need to kind of step back and look at that. I have numbers similar to Christina, but I have a little bit higher on, whatever the first category was. The open positions. And I'm not necessarily sure I'm convinced. I think the message needs to be put carefully. I'm not convinced that not funding these open positions is going to be detrimental to services. One area I think you can look at is the hierarchical levels in some of these departments. I mean, there's one department in particular that's got 2 levels of middle management: top, next, supervisor. So I think that some of those, it's kind of an antiquated structure. I think you can cut out some of those without losing services or inhibiting services to the taxpayer. The other thing I think is, and everyone keeps talking about it too, is those revolving funds, both on the town and the school sides. So, when you look at all the different buckets of money that are out there, it's pretty cumbersome. And so I think, if we need to mow the cemetery, that should be coming out of their sale of lots or some other bucket, and just almost the way the schools, I forget their terminology, but how they put these buckets against their budget. I think the town should get in the practice of that. The rental from Rodenbush is a good example. I don't know what that gets used for, but it's definitely not offsetting the money that we spend on Rodenbush in our budget. So I would throw that out there as places where we could pull money. We're not infecting services at all. We're just lowering our coffers. Offsets, yeah. So we have offsets out there. I think they should be used. And it's a big it's a cumbersome list.
Yeah, I think we talked about last time, I think we needed to take a clear and systematic look at the revolving accounts.
Yeah, schools and town. I know we picked on
Yep.
schools a lot. Schools are a little more egregious, and they've been growing for a while. And on her sheet, I actually have a much larger number for schools, just because these funds have grown by so much lately. And I do understand the cliff argument, but I think that it can buy some time for them to create some more efficiencies, and even efficiencies with the town as far as like HR, AP, some of those things that we've talked about.
I'm gonna go on, I have some other recommendations that I've sort of pulled. They don't have dollar numbers attached to them, and they're probably more further out, but if we can just kind of look through these just to make sure that we all kind of agree.
They're good.
So if I can just read through some of them. So when we were talking about the schools, there was some questions about the school food services chargeback. So I've got a recommendation in there to just kind of look at that. And I think we did get an email back from Dr. Chu that said that they were looking at what they could do as far as the benefits for those employees and things that we kind of found were not being charged back to food services. Implementing a vehicle sharing calendar, because it seems like there's a lot of mileage and there's a lot of cars, and just to kind of rein that in a little bit. Some longer term ones. The one that came out of the budget task force was to examine the list of comparable towns that Westford uses for benchmarking. For both the town and the school list. On the town side, you know, it's been used for 20 years. You might argue that maybe not everything fits anymore. It may end up the same, but just may want to take a look at it, because we've been using the same list for a really long time. And then the school list, because DESI throws that curveball at you where it could change every few years, I'm not really sure what school committee could do with that, but it just seems like something that, you know, maybe you could look at and sort of stabilize a little bit. There was another out of the budget task force to moving all of the facilities, responsibilities, and budgets to public buildings. We saw a lot of towns had a lot of success with that, because they were they could more easily to manage everything.
And we did incorporate the COA this year into public facilities.
I saw that.
And we're looking at doing further actions.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because I know, talking to Jeff Goodwin at one point, there were things that were difficult because things were in different budgets and buckets, and it made it a little cumbersome. Another budget task force was to investigate regionalization and sharing within town departments and, you know, with other, possibly with other communities, kind of what Heather was saying. Another one out of the budget task force was to develop a strategy for Westford's solid waste disposal, getting to, you know, more best level practices. Health insurance obviously was another big one to kind of keep an eye on. There was something about the stormwater billing issue that was identified by the DPW business manager. You know, she probably could
We do
look-
the billing twice a year right now, to look at doing it once a year to
think he was
save on
looking at-
postage and some other efficiencies.
Yeah, and also changing the timing of it.
The commercial time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just to get to increase collections. I think they were having, he thought it was impacting their collections a little bit. This came up during the wastewater treatment, but it could probably go across the board. This is kind of, Dennis is investigating better pricing with multi-year contracts and agreements. And then our revolving funds, I could probably take out the school in the beginning of that and just say across the board revolving funds, so that they're not growing. And then just a blanket kind of to investigate any other efficiencies from the budget task force or anything else that kind of comes up. I don't know if I've hit everything or if there's anything that I missed. Sure, Dennis?
Just to elaborate on what you were saying, just a little bit. And you talked about regionalization, and I mentioned it in one of the budget hearings. It is obvious that the people in this town, and probably in most, I would say most Massachusetts communities, want to keep a real local control handle on education. I mean, I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. And I think you have to remember that when you're looking at the future. But when I talk about restructuring, and I'm talking about how do you take the pressure off, and you can put more resources into one place, which you're not getting from your local tax base anymore, and you're probably not going to get any assistance from the state government either. The way that I would suggest that you try looking at it is to explore the regionalization of the public safety services. Now, this doesn't happen tomorrow or next week, right? But what you would start with is the public safety communications. That's the first place I would go, and I would begin to start looking at, can you regionalize that process? Because what you're going to find is if you can spread out the regionalization or the management of these agencies over more than one community, you're going to reduce those costs significantly, at least to your own community. Right. The second thing is then you would start thinking about maybe start regionalizing the police over a period of time, and then probably lastly would be the fire department, because that's going to be the biggest capital piece that you're going to have to deal with. But by doing the public safety communication first, you at least maybe find the communities that might be interested and working with you in trying to regionalize in that regard. One of the problems you can see with the police department is you get a turnover rate of something like 18%, 14%. It's because there's no opportunities for these officers to move up in a small town like this. And as a result, they get disgruntled, they start looking around for other places to go, and every time they walk out the door, it's costing not only you, some $4,000 or $5,000 per person to train them, but also the cost that goes into the background investigations and the screening process and all that, which is very significant. Same thing with the fire department as well. So that's something I think the future is, it's going to be worth looking into that. It's a radical departure from Massachusetts local government, but the conditions that we're seeing in both the nation and in the state are going to kind of militate some kind of creative alternative. So it's an offer for you.
Just to follow on that, I think Pepperell, Townsend, some other, they've regionalized their dispatch. So there are examples out there that we can learn from that have already done it.
Yeah, there's quite a few, and I think the state is offering grants, I guess, but we've looked into this, yeah.
I do just want to make a comment about our police turnover, and I think the chief was very clear in his public hearing, is we had an immense number of retirements.
He did.
Some leaving the force just because they didn't want to be there. So we are seeing a lot of uptick related to promotions and other things in this point in time. Perhaps in the past it wasn't that way, but this year in particular, there's an immense amount of retirements that are being backfilled by
I just think that
others.
those retirements at those rank levels are going to put an impact in your retirement fund, okay? Because you have to maintain those. That's another thing you can thin out a little bit by looking into regionalization.
I got one more that just popped up, and this is again, outside of our control, but maybe leveraging discussions with our legislature, that, as I understand it, the TAC was not constrained to the 2.5, right? But they identified the exact same budget challenges. So I don't know if the state can help offset some of those costs, or provide some relief to member towns of all. I'm going to assume it's all regional school districts that are going through this type of thing. So just another, discussions with the legislator. I think you mentioned bringing them in for a discussion in front of the select board.
Yes. Yep.
Kind of putting them on the hot seat, that these are pressures that, that, as Hari pointed out, a 0.75 increase to, in state aid does not cut it when everyone's costs are well beyond that.
So I think, anything else? I think we're kind of wrapping it up.
Are you going to add to the recommendations, like the restructuring kind of thing? Because then I'm also wondering, on number 4, it doesn't specifically say it, but I know that pay the throw has been talked about for years and years, and I don't know what the answer is or anything, but I know you and I have talked about the stickers, which are $5, which seems insane. It's kind of
I know the recycling commission is kind of working on that. I cut and pasted this out of the budget task force because I don't think it's up to us to sort of dictate which way it goes. It was more just
Reminder.
encouraging, to do something.
If we have
right?
recommendations, can we send them to you and Dan? Because, I did write a few down myself, too. I'd like to just ship them over to you both.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, they'd be most welcome.
So I would kind of like to take a vote, or just so that it is formal, that we all kind of agree with this, just so that they have it.
And you'll have a chance to take a look. You'll have a chance to vote again on whatever the actual select board recommendation is.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this isn't that.
This is not
The
that.
formal thing will come later.
Exactly.
This is a recommendation.
This is more just.
I don't know if a vote is really necessary. That's more guidance.
That's fine too. It's kind of up to the committee. I guess I would just at least like to get everybody's buy-in on this.
I'd like
in
to see
some
it
way.
higher, to be honest.
Okay.
Some of the concerns that we've heard, I
I
just want to make sure that the
initial-
public doesn't get confused about what a
That's
vote
true.
means.
Sure.
So
That's why
That's
we
fine.
would certainly accept a consensus recommendation, or, and of course, it's your
Yeah.
call. But just my thought for the second is, because they're used to thinking a vote means something
Right.
different, We just want to make sure they're understanding clearly.
That's fine. That's really all I wanted. Just, I don't want, I mean, I did pull this together, so I just want to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page.
I think, look, it's a very good initial assessment, or initial set of directions for it. And I think there's additional things that could be added, but I mean, I certainly have no objections with this, and I think it'll help them
Okay.
get started. So you want a motion to accept?
I'm seeing nodding heads. Are we kind of,
So.
that's fine with me.
I don't know if voting adds any value for this one. So here is the thing, right? We can generally vote on that finance committee has recommended
Without the
for you
money.
to do a much more reductions to the needs-based budget in a principal way that works. But voting on that document wouldn't make sense because
That's fine.
that's a partial list, and if we vote on it, that becomes the list for their consideration.
That's fine. I think I'm hearing from everybody. I'm seeing nodding heads. Beth?
Can we
Shelby?
just add,
Yep.
add to that list though, the trucks that came off of our budget?
What did
'cause
you
that's
wanna
already
add
taken
about
out.
it?
It's already taken out kind of, sort of through capital, but there's still like $148,000 in that just under $5 million number that's already kind of gone, so it's not here. It's still here, but it's not really there because of capital, so it's out there.
They will add that in
I
and
think
figure it out.
we
Yeah,
accept
yeah,
this
yeah.
with a strong consensus,
Yeah.
and we're open to anything else you send as suggestions.
Okay. That sounds good.
That's fine.
Okay.
Can I just have Dan remind everyone of kind of the timeline, because we are on a tight timeline.
Yeah.
We are working vigorously to get this all done, so getting comments to us is of the essence. So could you remind us of where we are in the timeline now and where we need to be?
Yep, so we're meeting twice next week, once at the select board, we're gonna post so we can, listen to the override discussion. And then we're meeting on the 15th to begin, recommendations for the annual town meeting warrant. We're gonna meet again on the 29th. I have a feeling we're gonna push some of the major articles back to the 29th, probably the budget too, because we don't have enough time to, digest everything that's said on Tuesday night. And then all edits for the FinCom book are due on March 1st, which is basically a day after we're meeting. We may have a day or two of leeway, but honestly, it's takes at least 5 days working all day to get that done, and that needs to be on the website by March 8th at the latest, so 15 days before. Then town meeting is on March 23rd. So it's a very truncated timeline going forward from here.
Can we move that 29th meeting up to earlier in the week, just so we have,
Possibly.
The select board's meeting on the 27th.
They are meeting on the, okay. 28th.
26th?
Well, I think we want to meet, I think we may want to meet after them, because
Aren't they meeting on the
How about the
15th?
following Monday?
13th, but,
What's the following Monday? Is that too late?
let me work with Dan and Kristen and Tom, and we'll see if it makes sense to shift that at all. I'm just thinking that
Is that
if
just a-
you're seeing a first look on the 13th, I doubt it's going to be finalized.
We may schedule another meeting on the 20th.
Yeah.
We're going to be, I think we're trying to get to near final or get a consensus approach, but I think we're going to need
Yeah.
a little bit more time to get it to final.
Yeah.
Just because it's just a complicated
Okay.
thing with so many parts.
But if they, all right, so I'll keep you all, but we'll see if we can pull that in, just so we have a little more time for the book.
Yeah.
But it depends on when everything's finalized, so there's kind of yeah. Anything else? We good?
Should we talk about the book, or?
No. No.
Because I'm just wondering, like, I'm going to talk about it anyway. And I know our book is very cumbersome, and the more I think about it, the more I feel like, what are the obligations? Do we even need to have this detailed book? Maybe we just give a summary. I don't know. It's just, I'm really struggling with the timeline and how we're going to have something.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just throwing
exactly.
that out
I
there,
think the
guess.
charter does say something about a report to the
Yes.
town
A
meeting.
report.
So-
We have to-
report,
But not, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
we have to
I
create
wouldn't-
something, but I don't think it says exactly what we have to
Right.
create,
We
so,
want to make sure we're in those parameters
There's-
and not confusing people.
sure.
I wouldn't recommend changing the structure of the book along with the override complications, because it would send a message saying that
Yeah.
we are doing the causation versus effect. We don't want to project that.
Some people, the only time they're gonna see this is at the town meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. Okay. I think we'll be on to approval of minutes, so if you, it's up to you if you guys
I
want
think we're
to.
set.
Yeah.
Okay. So Select Board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All those in favor, Scott,
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
Andrea,
Aye.
John.
Aye.
I'm an aye. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you Tuesday. All right. Minutes from January 25th and February 1st. Did we
I'll
get
take
a
the
chance
first one. So
to?
what's the one for, the first one there?
January 25th?
I'll move to approve.
Can we do them as consensus?
I didn't read the second one yet. There's so much other work happening here.
I'll second Dennis's for the,
Okay. So all in favor, I'll do a roll call on the January 25th minutes.
And I gave Dan
As
just a
amended, Heather did
As-
give one.
tiny
Okay.
little,
Okay, so as amended. Ingrid,
Hi.
Heather,
Aye.
Dennis,
Aye.
Shinji,
Aye.
Hari, Tom.
Aye.
Aye. I'm an aye.
Aye.
Beth, aye. Shelby? Aye. Okay, and we're gonna push, are we pushing the February 1st ones?
I would,
That's fine. I'm gonna see you people like another 8 times in the next month, so we can do it then, yeah.
You don't sound that excited, Christina.
I'm sorry, I'm so excited, yeah. All right, I think we're pretty good, just again, Tuesday, we have 2 meetings next week, Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesday, I assume, is town hall.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think
We're
we'll be
meeting at
be
town
back in
hall on Tuesday?
town hall.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or
Next week.
virtual. It's
On the
it's
15th,
select
we'll be
board.
back here. Town
Here.
hall's actually.
Planning
Oh.
board,
taken.
planning
Yeah.
board has a meeting.
Okay,
on the 15th.
so town hall on Tuesday, back here for
On
Thursday,
Thursday.
on Thursday. Okay, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second, everybody? Shelby,
You good?
you good? All right. Thank you.